All right, good morning, and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners Agenda Setting Work Session. It's August the 6th, and here we go. I'm John Hutchings, and to my right is...
Ty Metzer.
And to my left...
Vicki Larkin with Commissioner Edwards' office.
And he'll be in, I would imagine, shortly.
Ramiro Chavez, County Manager.
Robin Bolmar, Clerk of the Board.
Robin Corns, Executive Assistant.
And Megan.
Megan Porter, Public Information.
So thank you for attending. Thank you for watching. We're going to start by reviewing the Board of County Commissioners draft agenda for this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Then we'll look at the agenda for next Tuesday's BoCC meeting, and then review the Board of Health agenda after that for next week. So starting off, we'll kick off the meeting this afternoon at 2 p.m. and we'll call the meeting to order, and then followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Vice Chair Gary Edwards. And then we'll have an approval of the agenda, presumably, and the board meeting minutes from July 23rd. And then move right into presentations. And the first one is National Farmers Market Week Proclamation.
Yes, Commissioners, this is a yearly event where you have the opportunity to highlight the Olympia Farmers Market via proclamation as the National Farmers Market Week. Mr. Bryce Dazell, he's the operations manager of the Olympia Farmers Market, will be here this afternoon to receive the proclamation, and also he will be saying a few words for you.
Do you have any idea how many people will be coming?
The only one that I know is him accepting the proclamation. I am not aware of anybody else.
You're not either?
I'm not having any total confirmation on other farmers market managers coming. They have been all invited, and we have enough proclamations for each one.
Okay, thank you. Anything on that?
No.
Good, thank you. The next one is introduction of the new opioid response coordinator.
Yeah, this will be the opportunity for the Director of Public Health and Social Services, Shelley Slaughter, to present and introduce to you and formally to the public Ms. Katie Strasek. She is the new opioid response coordinator. And this has been really a pivotal hiring, I believe, as you formally adopted the response plan, the opioid response plans maybe a month ago. So the next steps on that plan will be the implementation of some of the strategies outlined in the plan. And Katie will be, again, pivotal as to how she's going to help us to move forward in the implementation of that.
Oh, good.
And Shelley's here if you have any questions.
Do you have any? Me neither. Good, thank you. Then there's the opportunity for the public to address the board.
Yes, you may receive some public testimony from Mr. John Pettit.
Who's that? I'm sorry?
John Pettit.
Oh, John Pettit, okay.
He submitted a written response, I believe, last week of what he's written testimony, what he's planning to present. And also he submitted a letter Sunday evening to you and myself. Both are related to the courthouse proposal, and we just go through the process of see how we can respond to that. Related to the letter that we received on Sunday, he has made an argument of perhaps the legal deficiencies related as to when this particular ballot can be in front of the voters, which is a special election or a general election. And also he makes a point of arguing perhaps the minor adjustments that is in the ordinance that perhaps he doesn't seem to be in accordance with the RCW as provided. So this letter that we received on Sunday, I have already submitted to the prosecuting attorneys for their review, and they're in the process of reviewing. I hope we will have a response to his concerns as soon as feasible.
How nice. Do you have any questions or comments on that?
I got a flurry of communications from Mr. Pettit regarding Indian Creek, liquefaction, a reconsideration motion, changes in the ordinance. timing of the ballot based on property tax, so it could be a lengthy process to work through all of that.
Was that all in that same letter or the email on Sunday?
I had at least 3 emails
I'm not aware of those emails and where the letter I received along what you received, and also a written testimony that he's planning to present today that we received last week here in the office, in which he highlights some concerns related to the environmental aspects of the project site, the financial costs, and also the impact to the taxpayers related to the 47 cents per 1,000 assessed value, which he continued to make an argument is 38.5% increase. So.
Okay. Is that it for the for public comment?
As far as I know, that's what I have.
Okay. And then county manager's update.
I will follow up, acknowledging that we've received this letter from Mr. Pettit, and that we're in the process of reviewing it, and that we will be providing a response as soon as feasible after legal review.
Okay. That takes us to item 3 on the agenda, consent items A and B. The first one, Human Resources, appointment to the Board of Equalization.
Yeah, for your consideration, this is an affirmation of your previous decision to appoint Lee Rudy as an alternate member of the Thurston County Board of Equalization, which this term expires by March 1st, 2020.
Okay, anything? Discussion on that?
No.
All right, and 3B, audit of the voucher list.
Yeah, that's your weekly voucher approval list.
Yep, got that. Okay. Department items, number 4 on the agenda, Information Technology, IT, authorize the director to advertise an RFP.
Yeah, for your consideration is to authorize the director to issue a request for proposals to secure a consultant to provide services for the website content management system. This project is already included in the budget, and I believe has a $200,000 amount allocated in the budget. And the intent of this request for proposals is to secure a vendor that can help us develop a consistent structure, a feel and look of the county's webpage. As you probably may have navigated through the county's website as a whole, there are some instances when you click on the specific offices and departments, as soon as you go 2-3 deep, you lose context as to where you are in terms of Thurston County or not. So I just want to make sure that this is not intended to have an oversight of the content of the website. The content is going to be the responsibility of each office and department as to how they can provide the content as they see fit. This is really related to the context, meaning the look and feel to have a consistent presence to the citizens of the county.
Good.
And Dennis is here to answer any questions.
So that's not, each department will still have its own fingerprint,
Yeah.
but this is regarding the overall structure of the
Yeah,
website.
for instance, is making sure that we have a consistent frame of the website, making sure that we have a consistent navigation tools on the website. Is that context that we need to bring forward consistently throughout all the different pages, web pages that we have in the county.
Okay. Any questions or comments on that?
So you said we budgeted $200,000?
Yeah, it's already included in the budget.
I don't think I have any questions.
Okay. Number 5, public health.
I'm sorry, and this is the next step when we receive the proposals and staff has gone through the review of those proposals. Then we'll come back to the board for your consideration to award the contract.
Okay. So what kind of a time frame would we be looking at once the RFP is done? Do you want to come on up, Dennis? Pretty please, thank you. And identify yourself.
Good morning. Dennis Osorio, Thurston County IT Department Director. I believe we're looking at, the RFP will close next month, but we'll start probably implementation next year. So we're giving us some time to work with the vendor to make sure that we could implement correctly.
Okay. Is that done in stages, or is it just one flip a switch, once you get it all set up?
I believe that's why we want to get a consultant on board to make sure that we implement correctly and what's the best way for the county to get from where we currently are to where we need to be. That's kind of their expertise. I would imagine we'll have to do some type of migration, but we also don't want to bring everything over that we have today. And then whatever they recommend as far as turning what sites on at what time.
Okay. Questions?
So the person or the firm that we contract with will have the artistic design expertise as well as the technical implementation expertise. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Yeah, and we'll be leaning on what a best practice is for an organization for a more enterprise style approach, similar to what Romero said. So we're having the same framework as we're going through all the offices and departments, yet the content will be up to those areas to manage.
As a part of this, is any part of this, does it include cybersecurity?
Oh yes, that will definitely be. It'll probably be a hosted service, so that will be looked at as well as we're looking through what vendors we select.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you. Anything further?
So an additional comment leading to this request for proposals is defining the business needs of the county. And that has been an effort of a group of representatives, PIO, representatives from the different offices and departments. So I just want to make sure that the request for proposals and the business requirements included within is really an effort from all the different offices and departments, PIOs, they have put their input on that. So it's not just a single silo approach on this. I just want to make sure that is stated.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Item number 5, Public Health and Social Services, setting a public hearing.
Yeah, Commissioners, for your consideration is for you to set a public hearing for September 3rd, 2009 at 3 in the afternoon for you to receive public testimony for a proposal of changing Chapter 2.03 of Title II of Thurston County Code. And this is related to the Board of Health meetings. Right now, the current code allows you for the Board of Health to meet on the second Tuesday of every month at 3:30 in the afternoon. That is stated in the code. For instance, when you're going to be reviewing the agenda today, since it's a Board of Health meeting, we need to make a special meeting notice. This requires a lot of time and effort just to make sure it's 24 hours in advance. We post it in the specific locations. So this intent change is to extend the meeting times in which the Board of Health meets. And so the proposed change at this point is to have the first and second Tuesday at 9 a.m. also be part of the regular meetings that you hold as a Board of Health. That's when you review the agenda as of today. So that's really the intent of this proposed change on the code. And again, for your considerations to set a public hearing for you to receive public testimony related to these changes.
Okay.
No, not anything.
Oh, me neither.
Then Shelley's here to answer any questions that you may have.
All right. No, apparently not. And that takes us to the county manager and all of the other nuts and bolts that we do at the end. So we'll move on to the draft agenda for the Board of County Commissioners meeting for next Tuesday, August 13th. And we'll call the meeting to order, and the Pledge of Allegiance will be led by Commissioner Menser. Then we'll do approval of an agenda and the board meeting minutes for today. And the opportunity for the public to address the board, so it might be a bit premature. County manager's updates, similar.
And I will follow up if there's any follow-up needs to be done.
Okay. And consent item at this point, consent items is the, it says A through C, but I only see A.
Yes, it needs to be corrected. I only have one.
Okay. And that's the voucher list, so we'll see what that looks like next week. And then department items, we've got Public Works request for approval of a interlocal agreement with the City of Lacey.
Yeah, before I outline this item, as you can see, this agenda is pretty light for next week.
Yeah.
And that's just the time of the year. There's staff taking vacation and everything else, so it's not unusual to see this light agenda during the summer months.
Okay.
And I will recommend for you to keep this meeting for the 13th, since you have a Board of Health at 3:30 on Sunday.
Right. Okay, so you want to walk us through the
Yes,
this interlocal?
item 4A from Public Works is for your consideration to approve the interlocal agreement with the City of Lacey related to the Mullen Road Southeast road improvements. As you may recall, you already awarded the contract to begin construction of Mullen Road from the Lacey city limits to Carpenter Road. This project the cost is $11,137,255. The makeup of the revenues for this project, we have a federal surface transportation program grant for $2 million. We have an state transportation improvement grant for $4.2 million. The county contributes $2,262,000, and the City of Lacey contributes $2,665,975. This local agreement is the instrument in which we receive the money from the City of Lacey. Again, the $2,665,975 as a contribution to this project.
Okay. Anything? Nope. Me neither. Thank you. Takes us to item number 5 next week, and that's again IT. And this is to authorize the purchase of short-tail telecom equipment for the FJC, Family Juvenile Court, and Field Operations Bureau. Is that the Sheriff's Office, Field Operations?
Yes.
TCSO?
So let me take you back to 2014. Perhaps that was before all of us in a way. That's when the county developed a plan with IT to go ahead and replace the outdated Nortel phones. And we have gone through the process of replacing the Nortel phones with the new system, which is the short-tail phones. We have the short-tail phones. Since then, we have been, IT has been systematically replacing the old systems, and we have replaced the Tiller Road Corrections Facility, the Prosecuting Attorney's Office, drug court, the main campus, Building 1 here, records, elections, pretrial, and district court. So the next step in the process within the same contract is to go ahead and replace the system in Family Juvenile Court and the Sheriff's Field Operations Bureau. You may don't notice, but sometimes when you try to forward a voicemail from the system that we have to another system, you just can't do it because those two systems don't talk to each other. So this is start globalizing the changes that we need to do in the short-tail system. Also, just to let you know, related to the phone systems, I have been working with Dennis to see how we can start eliminating the 8-digit code that we use when we make long-distance phone calls. And again, that's an old system that has been in place. So we're exploring options as to what is the value added that perhaps is not bringing to all of us, at least from my point of view. So at some point, we're going to be considering eliminating the 8 codes, and it will be just as a normal long-distance calls that we do.
But I just figured out how to do it.
So more to come on that. So this is just one of the many different aspects that we'll go through the process just to make sure that our phone systems are up to date.
Now, whose budget does this impact? All 3 budgets, IT
Well, this has
and
been
the Sheriff?
This is as part of the indirect cost, and so it's not really coming from any specific office as part of the indirect cost allocated to IT.
Okay.
And the cost of this particular change is $79,691.65.
Got it. Anything? Anything? Okay. And then we do the dusting up after that BoCC meeting, and then we move right into the Board of Health. So we're going to go through the Board of Health draft agenda for August 13th now. And we'll call the meeting to order, approval of the agenda and approval of the meeting minutes from June. And then we have proclamations and presentations. The first one, National Breastfeeding Month.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
I'm Shelley Slaughter, Director of Thurston County Public Health and Social Services and Administrator of your Board of Health. And with me is
Lydia Hodgkinson, Clerk of the Board of Health.
So, yes, the first item for your consideration will be to proclaim August National Breastfeeding Month. We want to raise the awareness of the important health benefits of breastfeeding here in our community and encourage parents to breastfeed and continue to breastfeed up to 1 year. Our Thurston County breastfeeding rates are lower than the state average rate, and so we want to encourage that and highlight the importance of it, as well as our Nurse Family Partnership Program and community partners that work together to support mothers in successful breastfeeding.
Okay. Anything on that? No. Gary? All right, next one is the Immunization Awareness Month.
Yes, it is also National Immunization Awareness Month. And in light of many recent disease outbreaks that are preventable by immunizations and our vaccination rates in Washington State and Thurston County, we want to encourage and remind people, especially at this time of year, before the upcoming flu season and as children are heading back to school, about the importance of being up to date on their vaccines.
Okay. Anything on that?
No, sir. Good.
Good. Opportunity for the public to address the Board of Health. Are you aware of anything
I am
coming
not
up?
aware. I am not aware
Okay.
of any.
And then we move into department items. Agenda item number 4 is back-to-school clinics.
So this supports our Immunization Awareness Month proclamation with action. We are holding 3 back-to-school clinics in which school supplies and immunizations are offered to children entering school. So there will be 3 locations in August. Thursday, August 15th at Little Red Schoolhouse at Camachin Middle School. Great event for families in our community. Thursday, August 22nd at Peter G. Schmidt Elementary School. And then Saturday, September 21st, we're partnering with Kaiser Permanente Olympia Medical Center to provide free immunizations to students who need them. And our public health emergency preparedness and our medical reserve corps are fabulous at putting together these events together every year.
Wonderful. Anything?
So this is something, I mean, this is just kind of consistent with what we've done in previous years?
Yes, we do. This is something that we do annually to support our community and to partner at this time of year as kids are going back to school. It especially benefits families in need.
How many did you say we have? Are we doing?
We're offering 3 separate clinics.
In different parts of the county?
Yes.
Okay.
Is Kaiser up there on off Lily Road?
Yes, it's just down the road from our public health department, public health and social services
Okay.
department.
So with that one, then there's Lacey, and then there's Tumwater.
Yes.
Okay. Anything?
On the immunizations, is that something that you've done every year, or is that enhanced now because of a lot of kids not being immunized before they go to school?
We have done this for many years. I am not sure exactly how many years. I know we've been able to expand sites and locations and the size and scope of different events, but each year we have increased the number of children that have been able to participate and get things like their physical exams as well as their immunizations.
And it takes us to item number 5, kindergarten readiness.
So Child, Family, and Community Wellness Division Director Liz Davis will provide a presentation to you on the importance of kindergarten readiness. Nearly half of children in Thurston County start kindergarten not ready with the skills that they need to be successful long term. So Liz will be highlighting efforts in our community, as well as community partners that are helping in this effort, specifically the Director of Child Care Action Council and the Director of the South Sound Reading Foundation.
Oh, very nice. Anything?
No, sir.
It was fun last, about 2 weeks ago, I was reading for the kindergarten program in Lacey, at Lacey Elementary School, and that was fun. That was part of the YMCA, I think. Yeah, but that'll be looking forward to seeing that. 'Cause what's the percentage of population, the kids?
30%.
30%.
100% of our future.
Yep. That's good stuff. Agenda item number 6, Thurston County homelessness update.
So your Thurston County Homeless and Affordable Housing Coordinator, Keely Marino, will be here to give you a monthly update on the activities that are improving the health of those experiencing homelessness in our community. This month, she will be talking about the Hazardous Weather Task Force and plans to respond to poor air quality for unsheltered individuals, as well as to prepare for the upcoming cold weather season.
Oh, good, thank you. Agenda item number 7, climate change mitigation plan.
So Chris Hawkins and members of the Climate and Clean Energy Action Team will be here to present to you information on climate change and the efforts of the action team to reduce carbon emissions in our county and partner with other jurisdictions as part of your partnership in the climate mitigation plan. So updates to the progress of the climate mitigation plan, as well as the climate action and clean energy team will be shared with you in their presentation.
Very good. Ed?
No.
Wow, then that takes us to agenda item number 8. We talk about our stuff, that's health-related. And number 9, Dr. Rachel Woods, her health officer's report.
Yes, she will provide updates on the activities that she's engaged in over the last month and upcoming efforts, specifically around communicable diseases.
Good, look forward to seeing her. Yes, Romero?
And you receive an email from Shelley, I believe over a week ago, announcing Dr. Woods will be retiring, I believe, in November of this year. So we'll be scheduling an executive session with you as to how you'd like to proceed with the replacement of Dr. Wood.
Okay.
That is coming up.
Yeah, and that's why I looked at you kind of funny, because I didn't remember when her last day was, but I'm glad she'll be here. Anything on that, on the health officer's report? Go ahead.
One issue, I know we were starting to train a potential health officer. Then that person maybe took a job over at Mason County.
We did not engage in training a new health officer. There was a proposal that you considered last year to create a deputy health officer position, but we did not proceed with that at that time. However, Dr. Wood, as a backup for multiple counties, provides mentorship to new and upcoming potential health officers, as well as students. And we did have one person who was interested in spending more time with Thurston County to learn about becoming a health officer, and he has since been hired by Mason County as their health officer.
Do we have a plan to backfill, whether it be that position or Dr. Wood's position? Or you got some ideas about where we're going to go on that, so we're not left kind of out on a limb?
Yes, unfortunately, we have a couple months to do some planning, and in our executive session, we'll be discussing the details of those plans.
And when is that executive session?
Yeah,
Maybe in the next couple of weeks, Commissioner.
Okay.
good. Okay.
And also, you may know that Dr. Wood also serves as in a part-time basis, the health officer for Lewis County. And as far as I understand, she's planning to continue serving in that role on a part-time basis. So what is left for Thurston County will be how we're going to be managing the 0.8 FTE of a health officer. And the conversation hopefully will be whether it's needed a full-time FTE a part-time FTE? If it's a part-time FTE, what level? Is it a 0.8, 0.5, whatever that is? And I think that's what probably Shelley's going to go through the process and explain it to the Board of Health.
So just to unconfuse me, Dr. Wood works, she's a Thurston County health officer, an employee, and she does part-time work in Lewis County.
Yeah, 0.2 FTE.
0.2, and so when she retires from Thurston, she'll be working for Lewis
She will
as a
continue-
.2,
I believe so.
not working for Thurston,
No.
working for Lewis County. They'll be picking her up, okay. All right.
We will need to, we have a contract right now with Lewis County. It's an interlocal contract for exchange of health services. It is set to expire on December 31st of 2019. Dr. Wood has indicated that her last day will be November 30th. So we'll be working with Lewis County to make the necessary changes to that contract so that they can employ Dr. Wood as they see fit, and we can separate our employment with Dr. Wood and move forward in engaging a new health officer.
Okay. Thank you. Anything, Tony?
Maybe one other thing.
Okay.
Will you be coming to that executive session already with some ideas about how to approach maybe how other jurisdictions are doing things of like size?
Yes, sir, I will. And also, as part of our statewide exchanges that we have with all of the other local health jurisdictions, all directors and state health officers meet regularly, and our last 2 meetings have been dedicated to discussing health officer succession planning because it's a statewide issue, and counties and local health jurisdictions are working together to find ways in which to develop the workforce and find creative and innovative ways to most efficiently utilize our health officer resources across the state. So yes, I have some ideas.
All right, that takes us to the director's report.
Yes, and I will be providing updates on our department activities and successes over the last month, and share important information that's upcoming about the health of our community.
Okay, then we adjourn. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Lydia. That takes us to proclamations and awards now. Excuse me.
La Bonita Bomar, Clerk of the Board. For proclamations and awards, I have no awards. We have one proclamation for today, as you reviewed. The next proclamation that will be coming before the board will be the National Preparedness Month. Staff has not submitted the AIS and/or proclamation as of yet. It will be on the agenda proposing for August 20th, and that would be with emergency services.
Okay,
So that's all I have for proclamations.
hang on, do you have any questions on the proclamation?
No, sir.
No.
Okay, thank you, La.
Thank you. Under advisory boards and commissions, I have a new application for the Fair Board, and that's a Michael Rendon, and his application is included. He is a Commissioner District 1. He lives in Commissioner District 1, and there is a vacancy in Commissioner District 1, 2, and a member at large.
So it's 3 vacancies?
There's 3 vacancies.
I met Mr. Rendon at the Thurston County Fair this last weekend. And he told me it has had his application in. And it looks like he was recruited by other members.
Yes.
And we just received an email, I believe, from let me find out. From Mr. Paul Lomwell. He's the president of the Fair Board, and I believe he is endorsing Mr. Rendon for your consideration to appoint him to the Fair Board.
I see that he's involved with the South Bay Fire Department as well as the Thurston County 4-H, and it was that area, the 4-H, is where I met him. And so he's got a background in emergency services. And he just seemed very, very nice and professional and such. And you say it's a recommendation from the board president?
Yes, that's a recommendation.
Okay. Any questions or comments on Mr. Rendon?
No,
Did you meet him at all?
I didn't get to meet him.
Did you meet him?
I did not, but I'm satisfied with your analysis.
She's involved in 4-H, that's a good,
That's a very good thing.
positive.
So can we decide now on this?
Absolutely.
It's all right with me.
Would you like to have this item this afternoon?
That'd be
the following
perfect,
week?
if you can find room
Yes.
on the agenda.
I'll make sure to
We'll
put-
make room.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And then Judy?
I have not heard back from the Area Agency on Aging. I have a call in to staff, and so I'm hoping to get a call back today.
Were you doing anything on that?
Yes, they're looking at that, but I
Okay.
can't give you an update.
Okay. So we're still on pause.
Yes. And just left a letter in from Katrina from the Boundary Review Board. I'm not seeking any action today on that, but I just wanted to make sure it was included in our packet.
Okay,
And that's all that I have.
that's it. Questions or comments for Law?
Is this the letter we saw before?
Yes.
Okay. Just, and this is also, is this connected to the one where we got an email from Ruth
Elder?
Elder?
No, that Ruth Elder is.
That was about the salary commission?
Yes.
And this is about boundary review board? Got it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Law. PIO, check in.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Megan Porter, your Public Information Supervisor. For Farmers Market Week, for the proclamation today, we're going to actually share the Thurston County Connection that Commissioner Hutchings did about 2 years ago on the
Oh,
Farmers
great.
Market. So we're going to add that with it. It's our most viewed. People really enjoy it, so we're going to include that with it. So we'll promote that a little bit more today.
That was
so-
fun.
Yeah, that one was a good one, and people really seem to enjoy that one. We posted the courthouse informational video yesterday afternoon. It's on YouTube. It's also on the project page, and we've shared it through social media. And so that's out there now. We'll continue to share that periodically until April. The PowerPoint video and FAQ videos are also on YouTube. Those were posted about a week and a half ago. We shared those through social media, and those are also available on the project website. So if anybody's looking for more information about the courthouse project, they can go to the website at www.thurstoncountywa.gov, and it's the very first websites listed under the hot topics.
Getting any hits thus far? Just a couple, I would imagine.
Yeah, we've gotten quite a few views and comments on it, so, and we'll continue to, I assume. We're getting a news release ready to go out about the 45th anniversary of Medic One, which happened on Sunday, August 4th. So that's 45 years of Medic One. So we'll be releasing that probably tomorrow. And then lastly, I have a call-in with Nisqually Valley News to get a correction run on the levy information that they ran about TCOM. In their article, it says that it's a 0.2 of 1% increase, where it's actually a 0.1% increase equaling 0.2 of 1%. And so I have a call-in with them to try and get that correction run.
Yeah, go ahead.
One article had 0.2 and one had 0.1. Is that what you're telling me?
The article in the Nisqually Valley News states that it is the the increase of 0.2 of 1%. That's what it states in here, but it's actually an increase of 0.1 of 1% to equal 0.2 of 1%. So
Well,
the increase is actually only 0.1 of 1%.
Well, when you say to equal 0.2, I think that's a bit confusing. We're asking the voters to increase 0.1
Yes.
of 1%.
Yes.
We're not asking them to do anything else.
No.
Why are you putting that other mechanism in, I mean, whether or not that was passed 30 years ago, what does that have to do with anything? Actually, we're asking the voters to support 1/10 of 1%. There's, might be other funding sources that they have as well. Why are we going to throw everything in the mix there? That's confusing, I believe, to the voters.
Sorry, that was just me trying to explain the difference between what it was stated in here and what it actually is. It's just an increase of 1/10 of 1%. I think when they read the news release, because the news release says from 1/10 of 1% to the rate of 2/10 of 1%. And so the news release includes that in there. And so I'm wondering if that's where they confused it, where they had put in there that it's just a 2/10 of 1% increase, where it's really not. It's just a 1/10 of 1% increase.
I really don't even know why the news release had from an increase or whatever. I mean, 30 years ago, we asked the voters to do something. And
But
I
that
would
news
think
release
that
is out.
I would think that if it would be trying to prevent confusion, because if I heard it was 1/10 of 1%, and then somewhere else I saw listed that, oh, there's going to be 2/10 of 1%, I'd be thinking that I've been lied to, but so it's making it clear to say we're adding 1/10 of 1% to a previously approved 1/10 of 1% for a total of 2/10.
well, that'd be okay, but if we're gonna tell the story, we ought to tell it all and say that 30 years ago or whenever that was, we asked the voters to fund the first responders dispatch, and we asked for 1/10, and we've went 30 years. Now we're asking, I'd rather have it be clear than muddy, that's all. Either, I don't know how to exactly go about that, but I want to make it as clear to the voters as possible.
Ramiro, go ahead.
Yeah, talking with Keith, the executive director, that was one of his biggest concerns, just to make sure that the voters didn't get confused, stating 1/10 of 1%, you already have that 1/10 of 1%.
Right. And that was put in place about 30 years
Yeah, but that
ago.
was his concern, because it could be taken as the other way. What are you asking 1/10 of 1% since you already have that?
Yeah.
So, and that was, his attempt on that news release was to clarify that it's an additional 1/10 of 1%.
And that was a
Really, that's
TCOM
what
news release?
is an additional 1/10 of 1% equals overall, because he didn't want to put himself in the position to be confused, because the voters could say, you already have 1/10 of 1%. What else are you asking?
Another messaging point on this is I heard over the weekend was somebody was confused about we always want to make sure we emphasize, or that it's always emphasized the breadth of the system that's involved. Like people think it's just police 911, and they don't understand that it's connected to medic one, and it's a broad-based communication. So we don't want people to feeling like this is just sort of law enforcement only, because it's broader than that, and that really changed the voter's mind that I was talking to when she understood that it was for all of our systems and fire and
It's really emergency communications.
emergency communication across the board
Right.
for our whole county.
And all first responders.
Yeah.
So maybe, Commissioner, maybe we can probably, in a month or so before the election, we can probably send another news release clarifying your concern. Yeah, it's point well taken.
Was that our news release or TCOM's news release?
TCOM drafted it and went through us to be released. Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty clear in the news release what the intent is, and it's being transparent about what we're actually asking. So it's not inaccurate in any way.
Then why are we asking for a clarification or retraction or what?
Because the Squally Valley News, the article is incorrect.
Okay, so it is incorrect.
It is incorrect in here. It was not
got it.
incorrect in the news
So
release. I think it was just interpreted
They didn't
incorrectly.
they didn't take the news release verbatim.
Yes.
They just
Perfect, I get it,
interpreted
thank
that.
you.
Yes.
And so I would hesitate to say that it was very clear, because they made a mistake reading it. So to me, that doesn't sound like that was very clear.
Have you read it?
Yes, I have.
The news release? It confused you?
No, the article.
The article, yeah. That's what we're,
They read the news release.
right.
It wasn't very clear because they made a mistake, or if it was clear, they wouldn't have made a mistake in their article. So,
But you said you read it and you weren't confused by it, but they were. I don't understand that.
Does that?
If it's
well,
clear,
that-
it's clear.
I guess that doesn't surprise me too much, but I do think it is a big issue that we make darn sure
Yep.
that the public is very clear on this issue and what it does.
I agree with that.
The reasoning behind it.
I'll
No,
provide
that's
this,
a
I'll
good point.
contact Keith Flowelling and give him a little synopsis of our conversation and see what else we can do to help get the information out to make sure it's very clear.
Yeah, it's
what's
worth,
being
it's
asked.
worth clarifying. Yeah, absolutely. The intent.
Going back to your, the, whatever your informational video, how long is that video?
It's 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, I haven't seen that one. I watched the frequently asked questions.
Yeah, just the informational one's just a brief 5-minute kind of overview.
Anything else, Gary? All right. That's it?
That's it?
I have nothing else for you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Briefing on public hearing decisions pending?
We have anything, Commissioner?
Okay. That takes us to the commissioner item. First one is the Sheriff's Office Narcotics Task Force.
Yeah, the sheriff, as well as the prosecuting attorney, will be here just about 10 o'clock
Okay.
to cover this item, so I may consider moving to the next item, Commissioner.
Thurston Conservation District, rates and charges.
Yeah, this is a follow-up to the couple of briefings that you received from the Thurston Conservation District. The last one was on June 27th, where they formally presented to the commissioners a resolution, which is included in your packet, where the Board of Supervisors for the Thurston Conservation District has passed the resolution again for the commissioners to consider the implementation of rates and charges. The implementation of rates and charges, it was a new concept back in 2017, leading to the 2018 year. Perhaps Commissioner Hutchins and Commissioner Edwards were part of that. There's a series of steps they would need to follow in terms of notifying the public. That is very prescriptive on leading to a public hearing. Back in 2017, leading to 2018, those steps were not necessarily followed, and there was not enough time to properly the commissioners take a formal action. So in 2018, there was not raising charges for the Thurston Conservation District. In 2018, the board supervisors engaged in that process again. They followed the necessary steps and presented to the commissioners for your consideration to implement raising charges for 2019. You, in December 2018, the board approved 1 year rates and charges, which is for 2019. So here we are. We have begun the process. They have already provided the proper notices. They have held a public hearing. Back on June 20th, they provided some information to you. They received total 18 comments. All of those, 18 were for the rates and charges. Out of the 18, some of the comments were 5 years. 5 were in favor of 5 years. 9 were in favor of 10 years. And 4 didn't identify what the duration of those rates and charges will be. The resolution before you, the Board of Supervisors passed, and again, encouraging the board to adopt rates and charges includes a 5-year rates and charges for your consideration. So this is what I'd like to bring to your attention, and I will ask to provide direction as to how we need to be moving forward on this, because time is of the essence. At least administratively, I need to do the proper notices leading to a public hearing and give you enough time to exercise your legislative authority in authorizing the rates and charges. So at this point, I will stop for you to have a conversation among yourselves.
All right. Go ahead.
I support their request. The 5 years that they articulated was in alignment with their strategic plan, so that made sense to me, and it's an important organization, so I support their request. I don't really have anything else to say about it.
Okay, go ahead.
I also support the rates and charges portion of their request. I do not support the 5-year portion of their request. We've got a history here of about 20 years, if more than 20 years. You can go back and review that in our local media. This has been ongoing problems. If we grant a 5-year funding source, there is no ability to reduce that once it's allowed. So I don't see any reason why we couldn't continue at the 1-year level until they have a record of being on track. They're doing very good right now. They're headed in the right direction. But there's litigation pending. There's some turmoil in the board. I'm sure we'll hear testimony from citizens as this thing comes forward. And I believe it's our job to provide the oversight to this board. That is not necessarily provided in legislation. I know the legislature is looking into this as well. As a general rule, there's about 300 votes that are cast by citizens of Thurston County, and there's millions of dollars at stake each year when they get not only their $500,000 that they get from the taxpayers, but when they bring in other grants that's taxpayer money. And I think they've done a great job on getting a lot of things organized. They're not there yet. There is still litigation pending. I understand there was a ruling against the Conservation Board within the last week or so from our own Superior Court. So I don't see it as a done deal that they ought to get no oversight. I think we ought to maintain our position and have oversight over what they're doing to continue their good work. That's all.
Can I get clarification on what you're talking about, where our court found against them, because I'm not aware of that.
I am
Been
not
off the
aware of
radar.
that particular action.
I'm sure it'll be.
But do you know
made
what it
public
is?
pretty
Can you
quick.
tell us?
Well, I don't know all the particulars. I haven't seen it myself, but
Okay.
apparently there's litigation pending both, I guess, in the federal court yet, too. I don't know all the particulars, but
Okay.
it just isn't a done deal yet. And so
Ju-
until it's done, I'd like to make sure
So
that
just to
we have
clarify,
oversight.
this is a conversation among yourselves. At this point, you are not exercising a vote.
Right.
Because the
Yeah. Right.
vote needs to be exercised after you held a public hearing.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that the conversation is in that nature, among yourselves. And because please don't run the risk of voting on something because it's not the right framework.
So we have to,
Right.
but we have to decide whether we're putting to a public hearing a 5-year funding scheme or a 1-year, is that, or some other number?
3 or
Well,
10.
what we
Right.
have done in the past is we take the recommendations of the Thurston Conservation District, and that goes out for public hearing. And at that point, you have the opportunity to exercise your vote, whether you want to affirm that or change the duration.
So it sounds like the board agrees with the work
agrees
that
on
the
the vote,
Conservation District does, and we agree to the rates and charges.
So
It's just a matter
I
of
will move
time.
that forward, but again, I just want to make sure that you're not voting on the duration at this point because it's not the appropriate setting.
No, but it's just a discussion we're having.
Yeah, it's just a discussion, and for me, it's for you to, I believe I already have a direction to continue with the process.
Yes.
To hold a public hearing
Yeah.
for implementing the rates and charges. That is the direction that I was looking for, so thank you. But again, continue the conversation, but please refrain yourself on exercising the vote.
So it sounds like we're there already. Yeah, we're from 1 to 10, somewhere in there. And, but we agree with what the work is that they're doing and the rates and charges, so proceed with the process.
Sounds good. Let's move on.
More information to come, it sounds like.
And,
Yeah, and watch the paper.
more information from the public that you will receive. So,
All right.
thank you.
That takes care of that one. I tell you what, How long will this, do you have any idea how long the sheriff's office will take? 10, 15, 20 minutes, 5 minutes?
We're still waiting for John Thunheim.
Oh, we are, okay.
But he should be part of the conversation. I think he will be here probably 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes. Then let's take a break now for staff. We'll take a break. It's
Okay.
5 minutes to 10. We'll take a quick 10-minute break, wait for the prosecutor to show up, and then we'll jump right back in at 5 after. Welcome back. It is still August the 6th, 2019, and we're continuing on with the Board of County Commissioners work session. And next on the Commissioners' items is the Sheriff's Office Narcotics Task Force request and discussion. And we have the Sheriff here, and
Yeah,
the Prosecuting
and the prosecuting attorney
Undersheriff.
as well. If may I ask you to join the table, please?
And please share a microphone.
I don't know, that's a pretty big ask.
Say that again in the microphone.
So allow me to frame the conversation, Commissioners, and then I'm sure there will be questions and answers following to my the framing. As you may recall, back on when you considered items on the first quarter budget amendment for the current budget, there was a request by the Sheriff's Office to add a new FTE, a new detective related to the Narcotics Task Force. Within the whole context, it's going to be funded by this revenue source, and also some of the description within, it was a couple of steps. There was a deputy prosecuting attorney who was serving within the Narcotics Task Force, and that was funded by what are called the TNT. And through the process, the Narcotics Task Force, I believe in April 15, 2018, they make a determination and they pass a resolution to reduce the contributions to the deputy prosecuting attorney related to this, the TNT, to just $12,000, meaning that will be a maximum on in any given year. As you may recall, during that conversation, there was a little bit of, you tabled that item, you didn't take an action, because there were some questions related to the prosecuting attorney's office as to how it's going to be able to mitigate the gap on the funding related to the deputy prosecuting attorney. And at this point, if the maximum allowed amount of the TNT contributing to the functions of this prosecuting attorney, deputy prosecuting attorney, is $12,000, that creates a gap of $74,000 in the budget. And that's really the gist of the conversation today. I think you have the sheriff and the prosecutor today, just to make sure you have all the questions answered that you may have. That's the framing of this issue. Staff, myself, are not here to argue or perhaps question the gist of the benefits of the background as to what the Sheriff's Office has requested in terms of adding a new detective. That's not the point of the conversation. The point of the conversation from the staff is how, through those actions, you're going to be mitigating the gap of $74,000 in the budget. That's really the bottom line.
Okay.
Did I frame that correctly, or?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'd like to maybe just give you some background about
Introduce
how this
yourself.
all evolved.
Thank you.
Is that picking me up now?
I was probably picking you up. I just want you to introduce yourself to
Okay.
the streamers at home.
Okay, I'm John Thunheim, County Prosecutor. I just thought maybe I'll just take a few minutes and I won't get into the weeds too much here.
Don't break our equipment, please.
Yeah, I won't get into the weeds too much, but I want to give you just a quick overview in terms of the history of this, the position and the partnership that's existed as part of the task force. Yeah, about 1987 or so, the county and the cities had joined together to form a task force. Actually, it was probably more like 85 that happened, give or take. And at that time, it was called the Joint Drug Enforcement Unit. And in about 1987, there was some federal money through what's now been commonly known as the Byrne Grant, or the Byrne JAG Grant, that was offered to drug task forces throughout the country. It flows through the state, and our task force applied and received funding for that through the Byrne Grant. And initially, that grant required that a certain portion of funding be allocated for prosecution. And so that was, and the office hired a deputy prosecutor based on that funding in 1988. And that position then historically has been assigned to the task force. Ironically, that was the position that I was hired into in 1990 when I was first hired as a deputy prosecutor. And I worked in the task force for about 5 years in that position. That's how I know about this funding and the sources of it, because I actually wrote the grant applications for a few years during that time. So that position has been historically in that unit throughout that period of time. A number of years ago, there was a cut in the burn grant, and so the revenue that was allocated to the prosecutor's office was reduced by roughly a half. So it was basically covering about a half of the FTE that was allocated to the task force. The board, at that time, the Board of County Commissioners met, I think, now I can't remember if this was after I was elected or if I was still chief deputy, but in any event, I was in that meeting and talked through it, and the board at that time made the decision to supplement the other half FTE to maintain the consistency in what was going on with the task force in terms of the allocation of the FTE. And so that it has basically now funded, say, the last 10 years, give or take. The last 10 years, it's funded about 1/2 of a deputy prosecutor, and over time, that deputy prosecutor has remained assigned to the task force, although based on our caseloads and our workload, that deputy has also been taking on other cases from the general felony part of the office, which we felt was appropriate given that the task force was funding half the FTE. That, by the way, I'll mention that lawyer also handles all of the hearings for forfeiture, for civil forfeiture. So any property that's seized by the task force under the civil forfeiture statutes, my deputy prosecutor handles that on behalf of the task force. As you know, the burn grant now has gone away, in part because of the reduction in funding, and in part because of the dispute that has arisen between the state and the federal government around the immigration issues and the requirements that the federal government was attempting to put on the grant funding. And so we've not had burden grant funding the last few years. I think the sheriff may actually know more details about that, because that grant's been handled through the task force commander for many, many years now. So the sheriff and I met a while ago to talk about that, and his desire to want to try to supplement the detective resources that were in that task force. And essentially I had to agree that with the loss of the burn grant, it was never the intent really for the task force to pick up and pay for the deputy prosecutor out of essentially seizure funding, forfeiture funding. And so, I essentially agreed that since that burn grant didn't exist, there wasn't any revenue stream to that effect. And so we agreed to essentially reduce that to zero. What I didn't realize at the time was when the fund was moved from the city of Lacey to the county, my deputy prosecutor position, the allocation for that was attached directly to that fund. So I didn't understand that piece of it. So now we've come to this place where the issue of allocating money away out of that fund to the detective has put in question. There's no longer, we intended to not have my position funded out of that fund, but the allocation still exists there. So we've got this kind of internal conflict about where this money goes. Bottom line is, I've got a deputy prosecutor that actually is still assigned to the task force. Still spends time out there, still advising them, doing other cases as well, and particularly doing major case advice to law enforcement throughout the county. And we have a revenue shortfall, it looks like, of the amount that Romero mentioned. So we've either got to resolve that through TNT funding, or if your direction is such, I will be asking for a policy level consideration to supplement that funding loss.
The 74.
Right. And so I'll let the sheriff, if he wants to fill in any gaps that I left or give you anything from his perspective.
So real quickly on the funding sources have stopped about 4 years ago since this, and it goes through the Washington State Department of Commerce is how we get the funding. And the funding is named after a law enforcement officer out in New York who was killed in the line of duty, and the funding goes for drug enforcement. And we had, as a board, had voted earlier this year that because the funding was going to go away, that we were going to try to figure out what we could do to get another detective in Thurston County Narcotics Task Force. In the last, well, I want to go into 5 years now, Olympia Police Department has not been involved in the Thurston County Narcotics Task Force. Last 4 years, Tumwater Police Department has not. In the last 2 years, Lacey Police Department has not been involved. And so we've been left with, at the time, a captain was in charge of the drug task force, and we had one detective assigned to the task force. It's now changed to where we have a lieutenant in the task force and still one detective from Thurston County. The other law enforcement agencies we have is we have, we have a part-time Chehalis tribal member that shows up once a week at best. We have a Department of Corrections who is part of it. We had a liquor cannabis board detective assigned, and that individual has since become a firefighter. So now we'll be having an open position for that. And we have the Washington State Gambling Commission also involved. And we have Homeland Security, Drug Enforcement Administration. They have a part-time agent assigned to us. And that's basically how the task force is comprised of right now. And plus we have a Washington State Patrol Sergeant on board. When we did the analysis of how often the prosecutor was involved in narcotics task force cases, kind of like what the prosecutor's saying, 36% of the prosecutor's time was spent on narcotics cases, and the other time was spent on other cases. And so at this time, it was decided by the prosecutor that the prosecuting position would be utilized to do all major cases throughout the county, like what the prosecutor's saying, and not just focus on narcotics cases. Most of that was brought up because over the last few years, the prosecuting attorney, or the deputy prosecuting attorney, had not been utilized as much as in previous years. And so what we're looking at, because of the cities pulling out of the narcotics task force, it's still a priority to the sheriff's office that we are doing mid to upper level drug enforcement, and we are seeing still a large amount of cases coming out of this county that definitely impact this community. And we're also utilizing the abilities of our detectives to do, we do gang enforcement or gang identification, and we're also using it for if you will, child prostitution, and doing the cases that we're seeing for human trafficking. So we're definitely involved in some human trafficking cases, and if you a few months ago we did do some stings in the county involving drug trafficking and seeing marijuana trafficking, where we're seeing that they're using individuals from other countries to do illegal marijuana grows and so forth. So we're seeing that the Narcotics Task Force is still a priority, or needs to be used in this county. And because of the lack of cases, I understand where the prosecutor's coming from, is saying why that individual is being utilized throughout the county, being used for other high priority cases, high profile crimes. But we are still seeing that drugs are still being sold every day in this county, and that we still want to combat that. And I believe that it is leading to the crisis that we're also dealing with when we're talking about homelessness and mental health and drug abuse and drug addiction. So.
Okay. Sure, we've got questions. Go ahead.
What is the amount of revenue that you end up with on your asset forfeiture?
Well, last month we seized about $151,000.
I mean, are you funding part of your operation with that? I guess that's what I'm wondering about.
Some of it, yes, to pay some of the bills, but what we're seeing mostly is that we're using it for overtime.
And it's not a guarantee every year you'll have that kind of funding either.
We have approximately $500,000 right now in seizure monies, not including the stuff that we have seized that haven't been, whether they have been sold, for example, homes or cars that have been seized, and going to seizure hearings for those. So every month, are we seizing items of value? Yes, but we're seizing them because they're ill-gotten gains, not because I need to fund a position, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not seizing money just to be that person to take everything away from you, and that's why we have these seizure hearings, and we voted on it with the vote being that we believe that it's better for us to get a detective, but unfortunately there's only 3 of us, myself, the prosecutor, and Washington State Patrol. Those are our 3 main board members now that we have.
So when you say we voted, that's the board you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead, you have a question? We'll just keep bouncing back and forth.
So,
go ahead.
Background question: why did the cities pull out of our joint task force?
At the time, the city of Olympia said that they didn't have the staffing for it. Tumwater still maintained the staffing, and I believe Lacey at the time decided that because I don't have the other 2 cities in there, why should I spend the monies on that, on doing that? Now, be very frank with you, the conversation about why they really pulled out, or what was the real reason, was it a political decision based on the city's belief on drug use or abuse, or was it because they really didn't believe that the task force was making an impact on the communities?
Right.
That I wasn't given that answer.
Okay.
Was that question asked? Yes. The unfortunate part is that asking that question means that I'm having to ask a city manager and a city council as to what those reasons are, and those really haven't been explained to me.
So I listened very carefully to all 3 of you, and I'm still not understanding exactly what the ask is. What am I being asked to decide? You've got a prosecutor that's I'll try to restate what I understood, and you can fill it in. You've got a prosecutor position that was paid for from 2 sources, and one of those sources is gone. What's left is what the board basically filled in, because you lost half, and the board filled that half in.
Right.
But now the other half's gone,
Right.
essentially. So you've got a board supporting half a prosecutor. Are we trying to preserve that, or are we trying to but you're talking about a detective. I'm confused as to what position we're trying to support here.
Yeah.
Through what money?
Well, I'll give you what I think is kind of the bottom line, at least my take on it. And by the way, I just just to kind of give you a little bit of clarification in terms of the role of the deputy that's assigned there now, just so you understand exactly what's going on. The deputy prosecutor in the task force, throughout the history of that, has had kind of two major functions. One is to provide ongoing advice and support to the detectives as they work their cases, and give them assistance in search warrants and other kind of investigative support. And then the second one was to actually take on and prosecute the cases that were generated by the task force. And so that position had that kind of dual role at the time. The first one still remains 100% in place. So the deputy I have assigned to the task force is still assigned to provide ongoing investigative support to the detectives in the task force, but we've actually expanded that role now to provide ongoing investigative support for any major case, any investigation going on, city, task force, or county, because frankly, the deputy that I've got assigned in there, Scott Jackson, is one of my senior deputies, and he's one of the best equipped to provide advice to law enforcement. So it made sense to kind of consolidate that together. But what I found was that while the task force was producing some major drug cases and still produces that, there were also other cases coming in kind of secondary to that. There were possession cases and kind of what I would say lower level dealing cases, and those now are getting funneled through my First Look program because of the nature of those cases. So the caseload has diverted a little bit away from that assigned deputy into the First Look for appropriate cases. The deputy prosecutor in the task force still is assigned to take on the major cases coming out of the task force. So just that's the role. Where we're at now, really, I think, is we're dealing with the loss of the burn grant, but it's kind of come to head through this kind of curvy pathway, right? We've lost this $82,000 in burn grant funding. The task force is willing to provide $12,000 as essentially consideration for our doing the civil forfeiture hearings, because that's outside the scope of our general work. That's not something we have to do. But that's the rest of the burn grant is lost. So that's the $70-some thousand that we're dealing with. I think why we're here is to figure out how we deal with that. I can't absorb, I don't have the budget to absorb that without putting at risk a deputy prosecutor position, which essentially would, force me to substantially reduce my level of service, either to the task force or just generally in terms of the criminal division. Because we are at maximum capacity right now as it is. So if I lose a deputy, I'm in a world of hurt, so to speak. So I think the ask is probably to supplement that burn grant loss. And in part, that loss, again, is because of the way that the federal government has changed their funding requirements around that.
Can I get one in?
Yeah.
Before I get to you, Robin, the $500,000 or so that you're sitting on in the forfeiture funds, that only can be used for the task force, correct?
Yes,
Does that include personnel or not?
I can use it for personnel. And
Assigned to the task force, but
Right.
no other reason. Yeah.
And just to clarify, is that the big issue that we're seeing on the, if you will, the drug task force is that if I'm paying for a prosecutor, but that prosecutor is only spending 36% of their time just for the task force and then being utilized throughout the entire county
For other items, yeah.
for other things, that's probably our biggest, if you will, a disagreement that we probably have, is that I'm going like, well, why am I paying for the city's prosecutor when it should be for the drug task force? And that's what those monies are intended for.
Right.
And that's what happened, is that because that money now, I don't know if we were funded last year, they just released like 2017 funding so that we could spend it, but they don't even know if we'll ever get to spend that monies again. So regardless of whatever your decision is today, those monies are gone, or we're not anticipating getting any of those monies. And so my big ask is gonna be is that I get to use my seizure funding to at least bring in another detective to work narcotics cases in this county to be able to see how much of an impact we are gonna be able to make because of having one more detective.
All right,
Yeah,
Robin?
I guess I want to be clear. I don't.
John, you're going to finish up on this? I want to get to Robin too, but
Okay, well, I just want to say, I don't think that the sheriff and I are in disagreement on this. The argument that he alluded to is what really persuaded me to concede, and that is that the position was being funded federally through a grant. So then it made sense, right, to keep that as it was going. But what's happened is that federal funding's gone, so that any funding would be coming directly from the seizure proceeds in the task force. So that's what really persuaded me to kind of concede that it was never part of the plan for seizure funds to pay for the deputy prosecutor. Yeah. So I don't want you to think that we're somehow in conflict over this. I agree with the rationale of this, but the bottom line is I'm trying to figure out how to come up with the loss of the burn grant money.
okay. Go ahead, Robin.
So just, these are restricted funds, and we must be careful of what's charged to them. And I think that the sheriff has clearly described what can and can't be charged to the seizure money. And I don't think attorney costs would be an eligible cost for that. So
Say that again?
I do not believe that the attorney costs would be an eligible expense against the seizure. It's extremely limited what you can charge to those seizure funds. So that's not an eligible expense.
Even if it's an attorney assigned solely.
I believe
To the
that that is
DOT.
correct. I think it can only be law enforcement agents who are charged to the seizure money, and we can double check that. But that aside, for the sake of clarity, you have two asks before you. The first ask is for a deputy to be paid for from the seizure fund. That's clear. It's approximately $130,000 for a full year. The second ask is because the seizure fund would no longer be paying $74,000 for the expense of a deputy prosecutor, that the board pay for that from general fund. Those are the two asks, kind of in a nutshell.
And just following up to that, if I may, you're not making a decision on a funding budget decision today. This is just to give you a background because you will be discussing the budget here in the next week or so. The question at this point will be perhaps for you to consider allowing the prosecuting attorney to include a request for the $74,000 for you to consider during your budget review and decisions.
And
So I just want to make sure that you don't get to the point of making an A or nay budget decisions at this point.
So that's also can't be delayed till next year, if I'm understanding all of this correctly, that's a decision for this year. So, as well as next year, but they want to make it effective this year. And again, since if the only revenue in the fund is seizure money, then I don't think that we should be charging the attorney cost to that fund at all.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Do you know, is this lack of funding a result of the governor declaring this a sanctuary state? I mean, is burn grant gone altogether across the United States, or is it just gone to certain jurisdictions that aren't doing something?
My personal opinion is that it's not tied directly to the governor's declaration, if you will. But as you recall from our prior experience with the burn grant, the federal government added requirements in, kind of slipped them in the back, that local agencies kind of proactively cooperate, if you will. I forget exactly what the language was, but it's the same language that caused us to step back and ultimately decline to sign a burn grant agreement locally. The governor did the same thing at the state level for the state.
And didn't that have something to do with a court case out of, I want to say Portland for some reason?
Yeah.
Clackamas County, Oregon?
Yeah, the Oregon federal court has ruled that local jails are, can be held civilly liable for detaining somebody in the jail on a federal non-judicial detainer.
But that was for the 2017 JAG money, and I think the state went to federal court to argue the 2017 JAG grant money. And as you may recall, you approved receiving those grants because that was resolved for the 2017.
Right.
But 2018 and 19 and on, that issue has not been resolved. So it continues to be an issue.
Yeah, it's in litigation. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, you know, this is all kind of in litigation, but the bottom line right now is that the funding the flow has stopped until the litigation gets resolved, or it might be coming in 2 years later after the litigation's resolved. I don't know, but either way, the funding's not coming in. I will say that I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Robin, but that's different than what my understanding was. The statute, the drug statute, says that the seizure funds can be used solely to enforce this chapter, which is the drug chapter of 6950. And I think there's widespread agreement across the state that could include prosecution. But I don't. But again, I'm not arguing that we take this out of drug fund. I'm actually asking the board to pick up the loss of the burn grant funding out of general fund, just so that we're not having to depend on burn grant funding anymore.
That's the intent of the $12,000, is to find portions of the prosecuting attorney's office.
For
the seizure.
part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're kind of touching on my question. I didn't understand where's the 12, if you're saying that's all restricted, how is the $12,000 factoring into this?
I could be wrong about this, I'd have to look.
Yeah, and I want to say that the 12,000 is, you know, anytime you seize, there's due process, right? There's a hearing that is convened, and that's an administrative hearing. My deputy prosecutor sits as the advocate, if you will, the civil advocate for the task force to do these civil hearings. So that's more of a fee for service to enforce the civil forfeiture statute. I'm relatively confident there's nothing improper about that, because if I didn't do it, the task force would essentially have to hire outside counsel to come in and do it for them.
So we're good with that, but there's question of whether or not there even is an option to divert more seizure funds toward your prosecutor because it's restricted to the.
Yeah, I suppose that's the case. But I'll just be very frank. My first request actually is to just put this into our maintenance funding and get it out of the burn grant, get it out of the TNT, and just make it part of essentially our maintenance funding.
Go ahead, Gary.
I think when we're talking tight budgets, like we're talking right now, I like to explain to the public that really doesn't understand this in depth, and I like to use the Parks Department as the example. We have a Parks Department with 4 employees. The city of Lacey has a Parks Department with 38 employees. It's just an example of what we're up against with revenue to conduct the county's business. And that's kind of where we're at today. The Ruckel House study is trying to look at ways to adjust this. They haven't come with any solution yet. But in my estimation, it's all about setting priorities. And for me, narcotics enforcement, sex trafficking with children, all all that litany of issues that you brought up have to be a priority. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm going to figure out a way to do it in some fashion. I just don't know what fashion is exactly right at this point.
Go ahead.
So I guess a question that I have is, if the attorney costs are an eligible expense, how much time would you say, as a portion of an FTE, is your attorney spending on these activities? Would you say it's like a 0.2 or a 0.5, or how much time are they spending?
You know, I guess my best estimate sitting here without having done any kind of calculation would be about half and half. Yeah. When you look at the time spent actually prosecuting the narcotics cases, so that's court time. And then if the task force actually starts to produce other major cases like the sex trafficking and things like that, that may not be allocated to that deputy, but that would go to other areas of the office, so we'd still be having resources there. And then the advice, yeah, roughly half and half.
So if we're talking fair and equitable allocation in accordance with state law, charging half your time, half of that, or charging about half time of what would be a equivalent of a deputy prosecutor would be an equitable allocation to that fund.
I would tentatively say yes, and I want to make sure that I drill into that a little bit, that I can support that, but that's my best estimate right now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
So if I could add on to that, with the request of an additional detective, obviously we're expecting to generate more cases just because of the investigation process. And along with that, I don't want to mislead anybody that to say that, or kind of ruin my, if you will, any chance that I might have of another detective. But I do want to be very honest with you. Do I think that a prosecutor will spend more time there after a detective's been there probably for a year or so, or two? Yes. I wouldn't want you to hold me to something where he says, well, you only said 50% of the time, because in reality, it could be, I believe it will be more just because of the impact that we will be able to have on our community. But that's just me being fair and just being honest about that answer. I know 50% is a fair enough answer today, but if you're saying a couple of years down the road, you're going to say, hey, John, you just said, or anyway.
No, I'm
you
just
only
curious
said-
about now.
Yeah.
I just
No,
want to be
that's
fair
fair.
about it. Yeah. So-
Go ahead, Ty.
But, you know, at the end of the day, the fund can't afford everything.
Yeah,
Exactly,
Right.
I agree with that.
Right.
So I think I got as Robin laid out the two asks, I think I understand the ins and outs of the second ask related to the prosecutor, but I want to make sure I get the first part, which is there's seizure funds and you want to use some of them for another deputy or a detective, and what's controversial about that, I guess, is what I'm wondering, given that what the funds are supposed to be for, what else would they be used for if we didn't allow that? I'm trying to get a
The
sense of.
prosecutor. They would be used to pay the expenses of the
equipment,
prosecutor.
training.
So there's not
Yes.
enough for everything.
Yeah.
The task force would like to use their revenue for a detective instead of paying the prosecutor costs.
But we might not be able to even, if I wanted to, for example, say, no, I want to fund that prosecutor, I can't do that because past half, because that would be potentially using the seizure funds
Right.
for non.
But all we're paying
Drug
for it this time
prosecution.
is half. We're paying half now.
That's
They
the
would
set-
like to pay much less than half
Okay.
and use that freed up money plus a little extra that's in the fund to pay for
And this would be a
the
new
deputy.
position for you, Sheriff.
Yes.
Yes.
And the need for that is mainly because of, you're saying the city's kind of pulling out and the leaning down, is that what I'm?
the task force was initially set up to do mid to upper level drug investigations. And through the years, it's also increased to investigate gangs. And now what we're looking to expand it into is human trafficking, to ensure that, because we are seeing that, especially through prostitution. And so expanding all that with only one detective, a detective sergeant from the state patrol, a supervisor from Thurston County, and then I have DEA sometimes, I have Homeland Security involved, ATF assists us, Liquor Cannabis Board and Gambling Commission. So we are trying to do the best we can, but we are seeing that there's a lot more going on in this county, unfortunately, than what we have resources to combat it or to continue bigger investigations. And so with the additional detective, it will help us do that. And in the end, hopefully, what my overall hopeful goal is to get the cities understanding that bad things really are happening in their cities. Because right now what we're seeing is that all the drug tips that we get for the city of Olympia, Tumwater, and Lacey, if they're just general tips, we're sending it to the cities. And the cities are using up their resources, whatever those resources are, because they pulled out of the drug task force. And so we're still focused on mid to upper level dealers. If we are seeing one in Lacey or Tumwater or Olympia, then we're focusing our attention on that. We're just not including the agencies because they don't have detectives to assist.
And I just want to add, I think, so the sheriff and I have actually spent a lot of time talking about a new vision for TNT, and he's alluding to that a little bit, and it's actually one I'm very excited about, and that is this expansion of the role of TNT into other kind of major crimes. There are crimes in this county that really can't be appropriately investigated at the detective level for one detective working in a police department. It requires coordination of effort. It requires, special tools, surveillance tools, time to do that, search warrant capacity, things like, one-party consent. All of those tools that were available in the drug investigation arena now are becoming relevant in lots of different kinds of essentially major crimes or organized crime situations. Human trafficking is the most obvious, and that's why we're talking about it. But I think we agree on this vision. We see the task force as becoming that resource that can be deployed to dealing with high-level organized crime in this county, whether that's dealing with drug or human trafficking or any other problem that might come along.
So any last questions so we can wrap this thing up from the commissioners?
No, I'm looking at the county manager, though. When are we going to
We'll
be
get to that. Do you have any other questions
No.
of the staff?
Well, just so kind of like looking at the global asks together, it seems like what we're kind of be doing is we'd be spending general fund to support this expansion of the vision of this major crimes task force. Because essentially we'd backfill your position, freeing up money for you to add your detective, which would then allow you to go beyond just simple drug interdiction and you work on the important things you were talking about.
And it would remove our dependence on burn rate.
And give us that kind of flexibility that we're not, okay.
So let's get to Robin, and then you can wrap it up, Romero.
I
Thank you.
just wanted to add one more thing that you need to bear in mind as you think about the path forward. And that is, that I believe there's an MOU between the county and the task force. When the board took on the administrative role for this fund, part of that agreement is the task force has the autonomy to set their own budget. And that's basically what they're doing here, to reduce the funding for the prosecutor and to allocate funds for this additional deputy is the direction that the task force, is it a board or a committee or whatever that body is, has set for their budget, and in accordance with agreement that they have with the county as the administrative arm, the Board of County Commissioners, you have to take an action because it's your fiduciary responsibility. But according to this agreement, you would agree to how they set the budget. So just throwing that out as one more factor to consider in this kind of request.
Okay.
So there's two legislative actions that you may take is the creation of a new position, which is the detective, and that's within your purview. And you heard this has revenue comes with it, and also considering supplementing the gap in funding for the deputy prosecuting attorney. And those are the two elements as a legislative authority that you have before you. I may recommend for the board to authorize both offices to submit a policy level request outlining those two items as soon as feasible for you to consider during your budget negotiations, which begin, budget deliberations, which will begin in a week and a half or so ago. So it will bring those two items for your considerations among the many other items that you will consider through your budget deliberations. That will be my suggestion to you.
One final question that I have, and that is, I heard that we want this done this year, but then I heard it wouldn't take place till next year.
But during your budget negotiations, you can probably make those determinations as to how you can adjust.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll have that flexibility,
Yeah.
that option, okay. Thank you, Sheriff, thank you, Prosecutor.
So if I may, there's a concurrence by the board to authorize both offices to submit a policy levels requests related to those two items.
1, 2, 3.
Could you possibly do that today, please? Because we're over a week beyond the deadline.
It'll be there today.
Thank you.
I heard that.
And if Johnny needs help, I'll help him out today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
I'm going to jump to item number 3, Salvation Army, because we have staff been sitting here most of the morning waiting, so the contract changes.
Yeah, Tom Webster is here, and let me just frame this. It's just informational to you, but let me lay out the background related to this.
Please.
On May 21st, 2019 of this year, you authorized the Director of Public Health to sign 30 contracts worth of $5,999,000 in additional dollars. Within that contract, you authorize an additional 10% for deviations within those contracts for under the preview of the director. Out of those 30 contracts, there are 3 contracts related to the cold weather shelter providers. And those 3 contracts included the Community Youth Service, Family Support Center, and the Salvation Army. 3 of those contracts amounts to $200,000 out of the $5.9 million. So also, if you may recall back in October 30th, 2018, there was an emergency request by the Salvation Army. They needed to have additional funding for shelter related to emergency shelter related to the hazardous weather task force. And the board approved an additional $65,000 to respond to that emergency. As of late, the Salvation Army has not been able to finish the remodel. So they have not been able to provide those services to the full extent, resulting in not being able to fully spend the $65,000 that it was allocated last year. So there puts a little bit of a timeline restriction because that contract related to the $65,000 lapses on August 31st, 2019. So it's coming up. So staff has been proactive in making sure that we don't lapse on the funding, and they have coordinated with the Salvation Army and the other 2 organizations to how we can reallocate that $65,000. which is within the 10% of the preview of the public health social services director. So in your attachment, there is a table. Looks like this, yes. In that table, you'll walk us through what is the original amount of the community youth services was $30,500, the family support center $55,000, and $114,500 for the Salvation Army. That equates to the $200,000 that I just spoke. The reallocation of the $65,000 is on the second column. And the proposal, and we're going to go ahead and do this allocation, which is additional $25,000 to the community youth services, $15,000 to the family support center, and reducing the Salvation Army from $65,000 to $25,000. So the total of their new contract will be $55,500 for the community youth service, $70,000 for the family support center, and $139,500 to the Salvation Army. And I think that this allocation resolves the issue of the lapsing of the contract, which is coming up August 31st, 2019. There is not really an action that is requested by the commissioners, just to make you aware of some of the changes, because this will be coming up to your attention one way or the other. Did I miss anything?
No, that's an excellent summary. And just to kind of clarify a little on the Salvation Army, their intent was to open a year-round shelter, and that's what that $65,000 was to go for, was for a year-round shelter. They were not able to raise enough funds to open that year-round shelter, and therefore they were unable to spend those monies. The cold weather shelter, with this contract, we expect that they will be able to open their cold weather shelter, and that's what these additional funds will be useful for. All the cold weather shelter providers indicated that they were operating at a loss for their cold weather shelter the last couple of years. So these additional funds will help those service providers meet the full cost of those cold weather shelters, or get closer to meeting the full costs of those cold weather shelters.
Anything?
Let me think for a minute.
Okay,
He's got
go
one.
ahead.
I'm good.
I want to thank you, Tom, and your staff for jumping on this and reallocating that money to CYS and the Family Support Center as well, and recognizing the need and getting the money, getting it out there to these folks ahead of the game. So thank you for that.
I'm okay.
Thank you for
All right.
hanging around.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
And thank you for yesterday as well. So that takes us to the SWAC response letter.
Yes, and I will ask
SWAC.
Jennifer to come. She needs to be part of this conversation. So allow me to frame this, the response letter. This is the commissioners, you had individual meetings with Ms. Renee Radcliffe Sinclair related to a motion the SWAC, the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, passed on July 3rd, 2019, which there's outlined 3 elements to that. Staff have drafted a response to that letter. Commissioner Menser has reviewed that and provided some comments, which is included in this version. Commissioner Edwards already agreed, concurred with the response. I don't think Commissioner Hutchins has the opportunity to review this letter, but we'll give you that. One of the elements that perhaps Commissioner Menser wanted to discuss was on item number 1, on the 3rd paragraph. And the county, and let me read this, the response is the county received comments back from DOE, the Department of Ecology, on the final draft of the solid waste management plan on June 22nd, 2018. And this is the part of the discussion. We have instructed the staff to work with the SWAC to address these remainder items and develop a process to complete the plan in preparation for adoption by the county and our city partners. This is a fundamental ask of you as to how you like to approach this, because if you may remember the conversation with the vice chair of the SWAC committee, perhaps her suggestion is as part of the motion was to open the whole solid waste management plan from the beginning and just work chapter by chapter by chapter again, since in that process the last time took over a year to go through this process. So that's the fundamental difference, whether you would like to entertain the idea of just finalizing the plan, knowing the plan can be amended down the road on many aspects of the plan, because on the second item, as part of the House Bill 1543, the plan needs to be amended anyways. So that's the conversation. Would you like to add anything, Jennifer, related to that? And maybe entertain you how you like to proceed on this.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jennifer Walker, Public Works Director. We are proposing to go through the red lines from the original draft that was submitted. Changes were made as a result of the review with the CFP and going through those changes with the SWAC members. So we've provided that to them. We had a meeting last month and did a high-level review, but not all members were in attendance, so we're planning on doing that again this next week, the 14th. We are interested in seeing if we can finalize the plan. I think there are a few changes potentially that could be made, but working with the SWAC members, and so that will be the focus for this next week, to hear some additional comments from them, to see if we can do that, knowing that there's going to be amendments that need to take place.
Okay.
So, I mean, I guess my question is just, I mean, I've talked to members of SWAC over and over and over again, and I've talked to at least 5 of them in depth, and they want to work through this plan. And I guess my question is, what's the downside of agreeing with their motion and letting them go a couple chapters a month for, Ms. Sinclair said she thought 90 days would be enough for them to get the work done they thought needed to be done. She thought that the plan, it's taken so long for whatever reasons that there are numbers that are not accurate any longer, and she thought there was a little more, she seemed to think there was a little more work to be done than you and Ramiro are talking about, and I'm wondering what the downside is to letting them do what it is they want to do, given where we are today.
Sure. So I think it probably will take a little bit longer than 3 months if we go through each of those. If we look at how it was done before, we will then put ourselves in the position of it's going to take longer than that. The new requirements that are coming online will then have to be taken into consideration, and this has to do with House Bill 1543. So that plan, the state has to create a recycling, contamination reduction, and outreach plan. They are required to do that by July of 2020. As soon as they do that, that's then what we'll use to guide us, and we're then required to create our own and have it incorporated. Our requirement will start on 2021. So there will be another requirement. We'll continue down kind of that path.
What if we put some side rails on them and say, you've got 90 days to do whatever you think you can accomplish? That way we know that they're not going to drag it out for 6 months or the whole year that it took last time, but we give them a chunk of time that's meaningful to have a couple meetings to go through the red lines and the things that you've talked about.
Well, so my plan is to have that conversation with them next week and find a path forward. I mean, that is what my approach is going to be with them.
I've been concerned about, and this is something I talked about with Ms. Sinclair, it's like the exchange of letters since, in the 6 months that I've been here, it just seems like letters go back and forth, but they're not directly connecting concerns to answers. I mean, and to send yet another letter back and say in a kind of a vague manner, we will work with SWAC to address remaining items. Well,
sure.
It's the lack of specific connection that seems to just be frustrating both sides.
Well, I don't know. I think we're trying to come to an agreement, and I think that we are having direct conversations at those SWAC meetings, and I think that members are choosing to also have other conversations and send out emails. So
yeah.
I am committed to working with them to try to find a path forward. it would be that's my direction. I'd like to work together with them to find a path forward and not have to have the board come and tell us down into operations how to do something.
Commissioner Edwards?
It seems to me that we have run many of these issues through the SWAC committee, but the committee continues to change. And so many of the things that they brought up, we actually did do. And I'm new to the committee as well. So I kind of like to look towards this person that you've got on as a temporary person, Wendy. I've been through a couple of presentations that she's put on, and she seems to be very knowledgeable about this whole process. Where does she fit in, and what does she think about this? I mean, how can you reflect on her position a little bit? But it seems like we've made concessions right along for the last several years, but new people came on and they didn't know maybe that stuff had taken place. And maybe the information wasn't passed along within their own organizations as they made those changes. So I'm just trying to figure all that out. Why we need to keep kind of going with the delays, and then there's personalities that come into play, and I don't know. I mean, I do like Commissioner Mentzer's suggestion about side rails. I mean, I know the term, what he's referring to. That makes sense to me, that we put some perimeters on if they are asking for something specific, but I'm not really seeing anything specific as much as generally they want a redo, which I don't really understand. And that, maybe you can help me out on that.
Well, I think there are a couple of items. I do believe that the transition of members coming on and off creates some challenges. I think that the process of going through the review is a lengthy process. And so when asked what's kind of the downside of opening it up, we have those existing challenges where now we have people that are off, that were here, that are going to move off, and potentially new members come on. Which is part of the reason why we had some of the struggles and where we are today. It's a lengthy process. We'll continue to go through it. And if we can, I do think we can come to an agreement. I feel confident in working with the SWAC. We continue to be committed to working with them to work through this, that we can find a path forward. That's what I'm committed to do. That's what I'm working on for the next meeting.
Can I just do one follow-up on that? And I never really did get a good understanding of why the holdup for Cowlitz County. That has kind of stumped me for a period of time. And now that's not an issue anymore? Or?
I think that there's certain members that are still encouraging and wanting the existing contracts to be extended longer to potentially take into account some opportunities that may exist depending on what happens with Cowlitz County. But I also know that we wouldn't recommend any contract or build any contract that didn't have opportunities to take into consideration and adjust our processes to take advantage of shorter hauling distances.
Okay, well, it's just as clear as mud.
Yeah. Any more?
Yeah, so I guess I just wanted to make sure that everybody was comfortable with this letter after having had the meetings that we all had, because it was, the timing of it, everything was just too compressed for, this draft. I mean, again, I think it's a little vague on point one, but if we don't have agreement on anything different, I guess this is kind of the response, and I'll trust Jennifer to...
Well, it's short of you giving specific direction on how to do operations, and I think that my preference would be that it's my responsibility to work with them to work through this, not put the board in a position to have to give specific direction on operations. I mean, that's my perspective.
Okay. Yep.
And I did review this last.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I don't remember, Thursday or Friday.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I may,
Yes, sir.
let me maybe answer Commissioner Mensah's, what are the consequences, just open that up, is money. Because the consultant is the one who needs to facilitate the review of this, and jurisdictions don't participate on that. It's the county has to foot the bill on going through this process. So it is a financial impact in consideration that we need to go through this. Secondly, if the board considers to put in a 3-month parameter, I can just tell you, then there's going to be the response as to why you present this to be a 3 months without giving us the opportunity to go through a thorough process. So may be vague in a way, but I think it gives the opportunity for Jennifer to start working on the conversations with the SWAC, which I believe is within her purview.
I guess it probably is a little bit vague, but by being vague, it gives Jennifer the opportunity to make it all work, I guess. Not locked in on any specifics.
I'll just say that I've been waiting for this to be ironed out for now going on 7 months. So I'm just hoping that we're going to get there.
Jennifer?
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.
So I will circulate the letter for your signature.
All right, that takes us to item number 5 on commissioner items, the public testimony follow-up.
I don't have anything related to that, Commissioner.
Okay. And now we're down to commissioner items. See if the commissioners have anything. Do you have anything?
Yep.
You got pages.
I've just got some notes.
Oh, okay. I didn't mean it that way.
Go ahead.
Yes, I did. Go ahead.
I guess I would ask you folks maybe if you were made aware in any of your talking with U.S. Fish and Wildlife if the 4D rule had ever come up, in recent conversations. And what the 4D rule is a, well, first of all, it's an exemption, I guess, under the Endangered Species Act to portions of it. But it has to do with the review. Every species that has a listing has what's called a 5-year review. And we're in the middle, apparently now, of a 5-year review. But I didn't know anything about it, that we were in the middle of a 5-year review. I was quite...
For the pocket gopher we're talking about?
Yes. I was quite surprised that was never brought up, either with, it's my understanding, in talking to the county manager, it wasn't brought up with the chair and the county manager's meeting. I talked to Josh about it, and it wasn't brought up in any of his activities, and so I don't know what went on with...
But did Josh know about it?
No.
About the 4D rule?
No, about the review.
Yeah.
He knows about the 4D rule.
Okay.
Okay, well, here's kind of the background on the 4D rule. So when they make a listing, U.S. Fish and Wildlife,
okay,
they make determinations on, well, what's practical. I mean, we still have to have a farm, so we're going to have inspectors following the tractor around, that kind of thing. So they exempted agriculture, for an example. And in the initial discussions, because I was involved in those all the way back in 2013 with the business community, they had said that, and I'd take this back, the director then over at U.S. Fish and Wildlife was a gentleman by the name of Berg. And since then, there was another fella that subsequently came on after he left for whatever reason. If anybody can find out why any of these things happen, I'd be interested. But anyway, new director came on. That director was there for a few years, and now he's went on, and now there's a new acting director there, and that person's name is Brad, apparently. So way back when, and Heather Burgess is the representative, legal representation for the Port Authority, Anyway, the group I was with Berg, and the group that she was with, were told that the 4D rule would cover municipalities, the urban growth area, schools, and agriculture, I think. Well, when it was all said and done and it was put in place and implemented, the only thing it exempted under the 4D rule was agriculture. And I think the timing might be right during the 5-year review to bring up the 4D rule. And here's the problem with it. If you digest growth management down to a simple sentence or short paragraph, it basically says, encourage growth in the urban core and discourage growth in rural America. And it's kind of about unorganized sprawl and all that. Well, when they put restrictions in place on municipalities and the urban growth area, those are the areas where we're supposed to have the growth to meet with the Growth Management Act. But this falls contrary to that accomplishment, mainly because if you have a municipal lot, for an example, and you've got gophers on it, well, you got to contend with the same thing that someone out in rural America. So there's no incentive to build on that municipal lot. You got to wait until your jurisdiction comes up with a mitigation plan, or you have to develop your own mitigation plan. And I'm told now that they don't do mitigation plans anymore. Anyway, I guess, and we've got an example here in the audience of somebody that has been through this quite a bit. So all I'm saying is that I believe the municipalities, I can tell you St. Martin's College tried to build a whole wing in town, and they were saddled with this whole problem. Tumwater has been saddled with it, Yelm has been saddled with it, Lacey, as far as I know, and in our own urban growth area in the county, but in the area designated for future growth. It has really caused a problem, and there is no point in setting aside a half acre for a species that cannot sustain itself without 53 acres. And if you're interested in where that comes from, it's the University of Nebraska, where the repository for the study on this pocket gopher is at. So all I'm asking is, do we want to look into maybe working with the port, because I've got calls in, I'm waiting for a call back actually, from the port, from Commissioner McGregor, because they're faced with this same problem. And it'd be a pretty simple process during the review period, which they kind of kept to themselves. I didn't know anything about it till Heather told me something about it. So apparently we're right in the middle of the review when this type of information needs to be presented to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I don't know, I contend they just wanted to withhold that information from us.
Okay, let me get, no, please, John, not yet, John. Get feedback on this?
Well, I guess one thought of just listening to what you're saying is that it sounds like what you're saying is there'd be a logical reason to have an exemption for municipal areas because we're trying to manage growth in a particular way.
The way the state.
But if we did that, but the species needs what it needs, you know, hopefully that's objective, you know, it needs a certain amount of recovery, protected territory to recover.
Well,
so aren't we just putting, if we were to pursue that, aren't we then just putting additional burden on ourselves that we would then be pushing even more mitigation out to ourselves in the rural area, which is good for growth management, but not necessarily good for our county treasury?
Well, we need to figure it out. We're still going to have to do a mitigation, whether we agree or not.
But if we take on, if I'm saying, if you say, if we argue that Tumwater shouldn't have to, we want to develop Tumwater because it's a municipality, and they shouldn't have to mitigate out by the airport or whatever. That's just more. The pocket gopher still needs a certain number of acres. That's just pushing more mitigation out onto us.
And I guess I don't disagree with that. That's probably right. But the reality is they don't know yet how many gophers are enough. When they propose a listing and then implement a listing, they're supposed to have a recovery plan. It's been 5 years, and they still don't have a recovery plan. They can't even tell us what's enough, what it should look like. So they are afoul of the law itself as well, I guess. So the whole thing is kind of a sloppy process of problems dumped on our community. And Mr. DeVetten has a prime example of what he's had to go through. And actually, I would like to, because I asked him to look something up for me, and he's just now got back, but I'd like to ask him about that.
Wait, hang on a minute before we do that. Going back to your first comment about, no, I didn't know about the 4D rule, and it's never come up with me and or Brad and Romero. And then Brad went on vacation, and I was supposed to call him, but he went on vacation. Now he's back early from vacation, and I'm supposed to call him this week, which only leaves today and or tomorrow after a flight, to call him about that. But I didn't know about the HCP. But I'll bring up the 4D rule, because I hadn't heard that. But also I want to ask him, why isn't Fish doing mitigation plans for other individuals while they're holding the county hostage? Because we're
I asked
still...
him that question.
Yeah, so Mr. DeVetten and others are just sitting like in the wind with like piñatas.
No, I understand. I have a citizen that came, it wasn't Mr. Tibetan, it was another citizen that came to one of my Meet the Commissioner events, and he had the same situation. Mm-hmm. And I asked Mr. Thompson, and the answer you're going to get is that they're not officially not doing them, but practically they don't have staffing, and they were already not doing very many of them. But now that we've got our draft plan and we're in that process, those citizens have even dropped further down their priority list in terms of staff resources.
So approve our plan. Let me get to Romero real quick.
Okay. Josh is your director of CPED is going to go and do a little more research related to the 4D rule and the 5-year review of the Endangered Species Act. But I will share with you frequently asked questions related to the 5-year review. But let me highlight a couple of key elements. And it says, what happens during the 5-year review? What do they consider, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, on their review? They will consider species biology, including but not limited to population trends, distribution, abundance, demographics, and genetics. Habitat conditions, including but not limited to amount, distribution, and sustainability, what you're stating. Conservation measures that have been benefit the species. Threat status and trends, and lastly, other new information, data, or corrections that might have become available that was not available when the species was listed. What will be the outcome of a 5-year review? There's 4 possible outcomes. That will be reclassify the species from threatened to endangered, an up list if that is the case. Reclassing the species from endangered to a threatened, the down list of the species. Remove the species from the listing, delisting the species period, or maintain the species current classification. Those are the 4 major outcomes of this process. And again, I will share this frequently asked questions with you. I think is good information to have. Mm-hmm. But those are the key elements that I wanted to, at least for the public's benefit, what the 5-year review period. So I appreciate your bringing this to our attention, Commissioner.
You bet, yeah.
And again, Josh is going to go through the process and engaging as to how the county can be involved in that 5 review period, if U.S. Fish and Wildlife has started the process.
Yeah.
I'll break him up.
Yeah, okay, just maybe a clarification on the revenue. You said that, the county, where we're going to get the money type thing. We had previously already identified a revenue source to implement a mitigation plan for everything that we plan on doing to meet that 30-year commitment. And maybe everybody doesn't agree with where that money is coming from, but every taxpayer in Thurston County contributes towards that. So I think we've kind of got that portion of it handled, that we can come up with a mitigation plan. I would still like to see a partnership develop between the state and the county And for an example on that, doctor's probably
Yeah.
down tonight.
I'll pack
But
it.
anyway, if we go there, but I would like to hear what Mr. Tivetan said, because I specifically asked him, because this is kind of just breaking news, if you will.
So let me set the framework for
Okay.
that. And we don't typically let members of the public come to a commission to address the board, but since you have been personally invited, and you came a great distance, and you have hot off the press information, and this directly impacts you, Mr. Tivetan, I invite you to come up to the microphone, to the table, sir. And introduce yourself, please, and where you're from.
My name is Jan Tvetten. I'm a 50-year-old resident of Rochester. Based upon Commissioner Edwards bringing to my attention this morning that there is a review going on, I jumped in the car and went out to see Fish and Wildlife. And it is not hot new news. This is the Federal Register that was published on June 11th, and the comment period ends on August 12th next week. So we just about escaped that thing. It says here difficult reading for me. To ensure consideration in our reviews, we are requesting submission of new information no later than August 12, 2019. And then it goes on, and then it makes cross-reference down here which items, which animals, species are covered. And they talk about the Olympia pocket gopher, Roy Prairie gopher, Tenina pocket gopher, and Yelm pocket gopher. So they're all the ones that we are struggling with. Now, I also got a copy of an article that appeared in Capital Press. And although this is not a news release from U.S. Fish and Service, they told me that Capital Press is very accurate on these kinds of things. And it talks to great length about it. I'll just read you one paragraph that is on the second page, and it says, the Olympia, Tenino, Yelm, and Roy Prairie gophers are subspecies of Masama pocket gopher. They live primarily underground, and there is no practical way to count them or to document whether the population is increasing or decreasing according to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That is the information that I picked up this morning, and I anxiously thought there might be interest to you.
Did we obtain copies of that, of those, do you mind?
I can have someone run copies of that, and if you want to save a little time, I'll even highlight them where the information is.
Thank you, Mr. Tivetan. Go ahead, Gary.
I guess I
You need
am.
to stay or not?
No, I think, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very kindly for making
bringing
the
that to our
trek
attention.
up here.
But I am very, very disappointed in U.S. Fish and Wildlife that since June, this has been up for review, and we've had numerous discussions with those individuals, and they have never mentioned this once to our staff or any of the folks that have had communication.
Absolutely.
I just, it's not, I couldn't figure out, I believe it was in the spring of 18, we had to file a Freedom of Information request to get some of our own scientific data that we had worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife to collect so that we could help to utilize that to develop our own HCP. I just don't see them as being anywhere near trying to work with us to solve a problem for our community. And it's just very frustrating. Now, what happens on the 12th, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, that's a week away, but here they've kind of held that to themselves, all the communication that we've had.
Yep.
I don't know what recourse we
before.
have, but I think we need to discuss it at some point.
All right. Josh, thank you. Welcome to the table. Intro yourself as you normally do, and then do you have something to add?
Joshua Cummings, I'm the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, and I wanted to just add that I appreciate the citizen Jan Tivetan's input on the Federal Register, and the staff will be interested to receive that information and follow up as quickly as possible. It does appear that there is an urgency to this matter.
Well, and I might add, not having been aware or made aware by Fish about the June 11th open comment period, I won't use the word nefarious, but it is skullduggery, that we weren't aware of this at all. Not at all. And we've had discussions with U.S. Fish. And it's very disheartening and frustrating.
Is it your sense, Josh, that we have information that sheds light on the population trends or abundance of these animals? I mean, given what he just quoted about, it's really hard to tell because they're underground, and given that we've been kind of seeing, as I understood, we've been seeing kind of a consistent 10%-ish, hit rate on the inspections. Is there anything that we're likely to have that would be of use to Fish and Wildlife, or do you know?
Well, we have all of that interim review that we've done over the past 4 years or so has led to data that we didn't have 5 years ago. And so I think it is upon us as staff to take a look at that information and see how it applies to the questions that are being asked under this 5-year review. But at this point, with this information and the speed at which this topic is moving, I'd like to check in with staff to have more information.
Sure.
So we might have information that we will provide them during this open comment period?
I'll review with staff and present that information to the board for your direction.
That is Monday is the deadline.
Yeah, registered.
I don't want to put Josh on the spot, but you are.
Yeah.
I believe the county needs to submit a letter
Yep.
of comments related to this 5-year. And I think we have enough data. And I believe the county, with your concurrence, should be put on record to encourage the delisting of the species if that is the ultimate goal.
Well,
if that's the board's decision.
Dave, I'm not taking any position on a delisting or delisting of species. I'm not a biologist. If we have data, data's data. If we have data, I give thumbs up to our staff to provide objective data information tomorrow, today, Friday, Monday morning. I don't care. You have my blessing to provide any information we have that could help the folks at Fish and Wildlife figure out whether a designation change is needed. Absolutely. But if we start trying to draft a policy letter, I don't believe we're going to have, I think that's going to derail the discussion, because then we're getting into issues that I think are above our pay grade and wouldn't be appropriate for us to be opining on. It's my position. I'd like to see you guys get whatever you think is relevant to Fish and Wildlife to them.
My discussion a couple of years ago with Fish has been those questions that Mr. Tivetan's brought up, and Romero, that I asked how many are there, pocket gophers, Mazama, and how many have there been, and what indicates that the reduction now is to the point where they're endangered or threatened. What would we need to have them, what numbers-wise would get them to be delisted or unthreatened? And the answer all across the board was, we don't know, we don't know, we don't know, and we don't need to tell you. And so I am not a biologist by any means, but if the ultimate resolution is delisting and the problem goes away, because apparently they're not listed anywhere else but Thurston County, if that's the ultimate goal, I would opt for a letter that says delisting is the optimum, but we're working to mitigate somehow and work with you, approve the doggone plan. And that's just my wording, but something, I'm not opposed to adding, delist them, or let's get on with the process. But again, I'm not a biologist. It might be a real threat, I don't know. Go ahead.
No, but I guess, yeah, I'd like to see it delisted, I guess, but we've got a prairie species issue that's more than the pocket gopher. So I think proper review is what we need. This time frame that we're being thrown in our lap is not very good. U.S. Department of Agriculture has study information, I've got it in my office, that lays out that you cannot, they've been attempting to eradicate this thing in certain areas, not as a species in total, but in certain areas for the last 70 years because it is so damaging to the agricultural and the utilities end of our infrastructure. And they've never been able to figure it out. It actually says in their own study material, you cannot eliminate these. When you quit poisoning them, they immediately backfill to where they were. And they are yet today trying to develop proper poisons to do just that. But in the past, they've been strychnine based. And strychnine based poisons are detrimental to the rest of the environment. So I'd at least like to mention that. I mean, I'm all for going that way as well. And have them think about implementing the 4D rule to match with the state's Growth Management Act. I think that makes sense to do that. And then if we're still stuck with the whole mitigation process, we move forward and do the best we can. We don't have to agree with the law. We just have to work within the law as it's laid out for us, that's all.
And in our letter, I would like to see the caveat put in somehow, politically, astutely, that until you approve, you being U.S. Fish and Wildlife, until you approve our HCP, we're not going to demand, we can demand anything we want, but we encourage or expect you to continue in the previous practice of working with individual citizens with an HCP and not further causing damage or harm to our citizens.
I'm with you on that.
So as I understand,
I'm with you on that part. But
as I understand, is the review period is for the 5-year review of the species.
mm-hmm.
And my suggestion to you was based on the four possible options that you have.
Yeah.
And again, reclassifying the species from threatened to endangered, that doesn't apply. Reclassifying the species from endangered to threatened, that might be more biological analysis that perhaps is above our pay rate.
Yeah.
Remove the species from the list, delist the species, or maintain the species as current classification. Because if my suggestion, if the board is planning to send a letter of comments, what is the outcome? What is the ask?
One of those four.
What is the ask out of those four options?
the ask is that you consider the information that our staff's provided in making a fair and balanced review of these scientific principles. And then we attach whatever Josh's staff finds is relevant. That's what I think the ask ought to be.
Go ahead.
I guess I don't disagree with that, but I think the ask ought to be delisted. And the reason I say delisted is they themselves have never come up with a recovery plan or been able to articulate what really is needed, the numbers and such. I mean, and they're supposed to have done that. Actually, at the time of the listing, they were supposed to have done it. Now we're 5 years into it, and they still haven't done it, nor have they approved a plan. And I like your analogy of they've asked us to bake a cake and didn't tell us the recipe. Now they've told us they don't like the cake. And that made sense to me. And I don't see them as an active partner in trying to solve a problem. I mean, we shouldn't have had to go and do the Freedom of Information request for information that we had originally supplied in part to them. And then here we are now in a situation that's been going on for some months. And we were never notified as kind of partners to solving a problem. Boy, that bugs me. But anyway, I'm
So going back, if I may, to Josh, put him on the spot.
Then we'll wrap this up.
What I'm hearing is that perhaps the board is interested in submitting a letter, comment letter. How quickly can we produce a letter for the commissioners to review that? And that's really the time constraint that we have.
Well, I guess I'd like to say maybe two things that answer that question. First off, when this 5-year review discussion was brought to my attention by Commissioner Edwards just this last weekend, the next first step CPAD took was action, and we engaged our legal counsel to better understand what the 5-year review process was and what information would be included in that. So that's currently being researched already. Secondly, after we received the response letter from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on our submittal, our HCP submittal, and did demonstrate that, you know, there was 12 or 13 big items that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service were concerned about when we submitted our HCP back in July of 2018. Over that past year, the staff has worked with this, our staff at the county have worked with the staff at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and have whittled those comments and concerns down to 3 that we received in that letter. And the staff, our staff, CPED, has been looking at those 3 concerns listed in that letter to provide some information. So we've already been on this. And so the request to have some information brought to the Board of County Commissioners for their direction on what a letter might look like to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we could do it within 2 weeks. However, given the timeline of August 12th, I think it needs to be done within the next 2 to 3 days.
Yeah.
So that's our charge, is to go all hands on deck and get to this as quickly as possible in the process that we've already started.
Just one thing, one real quick thing. Any chance we could include in there that we are very disappointed that we were never notified that this was an option that we could look into? I mean, I just think it was an intent on their part to keep us out of the loop. I don't know if we want to go that far to say that, but we can at least say we're disappointed we weren't notified.
Well, yeah, you could say something to the effect of more, you know, this is what information we've been able to come up with on the very short timeline.
In 1 week or 5 days or whatever it is.
Had we been notified earlier, we might have been able to provide more input.
Right. And
something of that nature.
I was under the impression they've always talked about the fact that we're trying to do this together to come up with a solution. This doesn't sound like together to me.
You're being
this
too polite. I'm thinking, how dare you?
Well, okay. Well, I'm trying to be diplomatic.
I'm not in a position to assign motive. The they that is, there are multiple individuals. And so again, our team has been working with, we have achieved success over the last year in whittling down the concerns to 3.
And the public comment closes Monday, and I am interested in seeing how many and what those comments are, and we may have to file a Freedom of Information to get that information unless they are forthcoming with it. But I'd love to see what the public or anybody else has submitted.
Well, I would like to know who even knew about it. I don't know that the public knew about it.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Okay, you can't bring any more items up, okay? You're done for the day.
Okay.
Thank you, Josh. You have what you need, Romero?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I'll have to do an electronic signature.
I think most importantly will be the review. I think the board needs to feel comfortable as to how that letter is going to go out.
I'll be on it. Thank you, sir.
And I'd like to thank Mr. DeVetten for his work in short notice, too. Thank you.
Mr. DeVetten, thank you again very much. The board thanks you. Do you have any commissioner items?
I had one I wanted to just roll out real quick. I was meeting with the prosecuting attorney and sheriff, and we're kind of working on law and justice steering committee type stuff, and we were talking about, you know, kind of what big picture items we might want to focus Law and Justice Council work on conceptually. One item that's come up a lot is the idea of a reentry center. I just showed them an article that you guys probably saw it in the National Association of Counties newsletter we get, newspaper thing, that Clackamas County just started a reentry center, which is something that I've been talking about. Snohomish County has one, Pierce County, kind of one-stop shopping for people coming out of jail, and it's usually across the street from the jail or something like that. And so anyway, Prosecutor Thunheim mentioned that if the courthouse project is approved by the voters and we actually built that, embedding that type of a REAP thing into the building would be really, it'd be another added benefit to having Olympia Court and Thurston County Court. So I'm just throwing that out there. I know it's not something that we're going to decide or whatever, I guess, but I wanted to know. I don't want to talk to citizens about even that being a possibility if it's something about it that's not a possibility. So I wanted to ask if anybody vehemently objected to the concept, or if Robin, maybe if there's something about it that couldn't happen. I mean, is the design flexible enough that if the board or the community wanted to pursue something like that, it would be theoretically possible?
The courthouse is not designed yet,
Right.
so theoretically it is absolutely possible. And then as far as funding it, that would be the next hurdle. But
Okay, I just want to make sure that I don't,
it's-
not even to
it's
talk about
feasible.
something that's not real or that's not possible.
Does it make sense to put it in the new courthouse when most of them are located next to the jail?
That was my question.
Or
Yeah,
is
yeah.
it make more sense
The
to put
location.
it in that small amount of space we have at the CSA building? It's my understanding that the BHO was not successful at getting funding to expand the triage center, so we've got a little space right there.
Yeah, it's just, maybe, I just wanted to know.
It's
John
feasible.
Thunheim got kind of excited about that concept, and I just told him that I would just float the concept here so that if anyone had an easy way to shoot it down, I would communicate that.
I love the concept. It's
'Cause
just going
it's-
to be location.
Yeah, I mean, because usually these centers are, what's hard about them is the building, like having the space, and building. In Snohomish County, they used a shuttered building, and it was, they had an easy grab, and here, we might be building a new courthouse, and it would be something that we could potentially incorporate to provide more services to the community by having the courts co-located.
Yeah.
Yep.
I guess I'd like to take that one step farther and have us look into the possibility of doing what Robin talked about, because regardless of what happens on the new courthouse concept, we'd probably need to have it at the jail anyway, the main jail. So if it's worth thinking about doing, which I agree, it's definitely worth looking into, why not start Plan B already and get something rolling that headed that direction towards some type of a solution, if that'll help prevent recidivism, because we know that a lot of our clients, recidivism is a big piece of our population. So if we could help those folks not fall into that spiral, we'd be much better off.
And I have one, just to bring up this, just a bit of information. Ty and I heard yesterday at the BHO that there's a new law that took effect this month on pay equity. And what that means is if someone's applying for a job, and we're hiring people a lot, that they put down their current and previous employment and the salary that they've been paid. And apparently this new law says we're not allowed to ask those questions any longer. I just want to be sure that HR, I know Maria's up on it. I just want to be sure.
We have already implemented that on our applications, Commissioner, so we no longer ask, we have not been asking the salary for over a year now.
Oh, yes.
We figured, but we just
I
had
knew
to make
it.
sure.
Yeah,
We knew it.
Yeah, we have, if you see the job applications, doesn't include salary history anymore.
Perfect,
And in
thank you.
fact, when a hiring manager is in the process of placing an individual on a specific scale, if that scale goes beyond the parameters that need to ask the county manager for further approval, it took me a little while to go through that process because I didn't have the baseline of previous compensation. So it's a different approach that we're taking, but we're
Right, 'cause the
aligned to that.
strategy now on arriving at the salary is different.
Yeah, we're aligned to that.
It has made it very difficult to figure out what an appropriate offer is.
That's what they were saying.
Yeah.
It's been very
difficult.
strange.
Wow. Yeah, we didn't know that. So glad we're on it. So anything for the good of the order
And now from my end.
from my seatmates? We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you at 2 o'clock.